Two mega effective and exciting ways of fishing in the summer are the pellet waggler and the bomb. The beauty of these two methods, you can fish in the same spot both on the bottom and up in the water. We're at the Glebe Fishery today on pool 1, and I'm going to be running you through some of the finer details to hopefully put a few more fish in your net. Conditions today dictate that I'm going to start on a lead. It's not that warm, we've even had some rain in the last 10 minutes or so. The way I like to go about my lead fishing, I like to pick a distance around say 25 metres so I can comfortably feed 20 pellets and just chuck my lead right in the middle of them. What I like to do is I like to get a stopwatch, set my time for 2 minutes, and every 2 minutes I'll do just exactly that. I'll feed another 20 pellets and I'll start looking for signs of fish, either on the bottom by looking at my tip or on the surface by showing fish. If while I'm fishing the lead I start to see signs of fish in my feed, and by that I mean fish swirling or turning for the pellets, it'll encourage me to reel in my lead and have a chuck on the pellet waggler. Bomb fishing setup, really simple. Starting off, I've got a Ventus 10-foot feeder rod, beautiful soft rod, nice progressive action but enough power in the blank to get in those bigger carp. That's combined with a 4000 Dyewood TDR reel, loaded up with 8-pound Pulse Pro. That's only 0.24 reel line, so that just ensures a nice thin line. I'm going to be able to hit that spot in the middle of my pellets every single time. Down to that, I've got a 10-gram Guru inline lead. I like a nice small lead for this style of fishing. It makes less disturbance on the surface, doesn't spook any fish, and it even makes like quite a nice sound like a pellet, so it might even attract a few fish into your swim. Just below this, I've got a large super tight line stop. I like a large over a medium for this, just because the medium can stick in the lead a little bit and not make the rig as free running, so a large one ensures that doesn't happen. The beauty of the line stop is you can move it up and down your line and alter the length of your hook length. At the Glebe today, it's a 20-inch hook length limit, so my hook length's set at 20 inches, but if I wanted to say fish a 2.5-foot hook length, I can move the line stop up and fish a 2.5-foot hook length and maybe catch a few more fish on the drop. My hook length material is 0.22 pure fluorocarbon. That's tied loop to the main line. I prefer the loop to loop setup just because it adds a little bit of stiffness to the rig. That goes down to a size 12 QM1. I feel like a size 12 is a nice size for an 8mm pellet. It looks about right. Down to a hair rig bait band. I like my bait band about 2mm from the hook. I just feel like when a fish picks up your bait, being 2mm from the hook, I think it's going to get nailed in the bottom lip every time. Generally for my fishing, I like a 12 to 18-inch hook length. And if you struggle to tie your own hook lengths, Guru do a huge range of ready rigs, including QM1's 2 bait bands. Like with a lot of methods, it's the little things that make a big difference. So I'm going to give you 3 quick tips for bomb fishing. My first tip is accuracy, and it's often difficult in places like this where you've not really got anything to aim at. So what I like to do, I like to get a few pellets in my catapult, fire them in, then have my rod ready by just simply sitting on it. So I can cast it out right in the middle of the pellets, and you know you're fishing in the right spot every time. Tip number 2 is all about casting past your feed. So sometimes you'll catch a few fish casting into your feed and it'll quieten off a little bit. It's a really good idea to just cast, not a lot, maybe 2 or 3 meters past your feed, and you can often get another little run of fish. My third tip is about twitching your hook bait, and it's probably something not a lot of people do. And the way I do this is I'll time it on my stopwatch, 2 minutes, and I'll grab the line just around the first line, sort of give it a sharp tug to the reel, and then tighten up to it again. And I'll usually give that about another 30 seconds after this, and sometimes it just disturbs the bottom a little bit and just catches that fish's eye. So now would be the perfect time to start thinking about fishing a waggler. I'm getting quite a few indications on the tip of my rod, and there's even an odd fish swirling when I'm firing in pellets, which is a bit surprising to be honest, because it's not really the right day for fishing a waggler, but I'm gonna wind this in. I'm definitely gonna get on the waggler now. Onto the waggler setup, and starting with the rod. It's an 11-foot Ventus float rod, beautiful rod, really responsive and really light, which is important when you're casting sort of 300 or 400 times in a day, which sometimes you are when you're waggler fishing. This is a Certate 3000 reel, a size smaller than for the lead fishing, it's just a bit lighter and nicer to fish with. Loaded up with 6-pound Pulse Pro line. Again, Pulse Pro is one of my favourite lines. Really low stretch, lovely fishing with when you're fishing with a waggler. Going down, I've got 3 super tight line stops, 1 above the float. You don't need any more than 1, to be honest. 2 below the float, because it just takes a little bit more hammer with your casting below the float. In between that, I've got one old pellet waggler attachment, and that just enables me to change the waggler depending on the conditions. I usually tie my hook lengths to 2 foot. I just feel like that's the shallowest I'm ever going to be likely to fish, so 2 foot's the shallowest, and I like a nice thick line to fish with when I'm fishing a waggler. That's 0.22 N gauge, tied to a size 12 QM1 and a hair rig bait band, very similar to the lead setup. You might be surprised to hear me using a QM1 as a hook for waggler fishing, but the principles of waggler fishing is very similar to lead fishing. A lot of the time your line's straight when the fish picks up your hook bait, and I just feel like a QM1, once it goes in, it doesn't come out and you hardly lose any fish. And now onto my dobbing setup. And you might ask why I've got 2 waggler setups. Well, this one's very similar, but with 2 differences really. It's got lighter reel line on it, only £5, but the reason I fish £5 reel line on this is it enables me to fish lighter floats. So on this rig, I'll be looking to fish a light foam guru waggler with one of our converters on the bottom. These are brilliant, they fly like an absolute arrow, and the little converter on the bottom just cocks the float perfectly, and they make a nice fish attracting plop when they hit the surface too. Even on flat calm days, I will fish a foam waggler in my feed, just makes very little disturbance and doesn't spook those big wary carp. A lot of the time when I'm fishing in my feed though, I'll fish a balsa waggler because they're a lot more stable in the wind, and it's a good idea to have 3 or 4 sizes set up on your side tray if you want to make any changes during your session. Feeding is the single most important thing when it comes to pellet waggler fishing, and there's loads of different ways of doing it. First up is probably the most standard way of going about it, and that would be to cast your waggler out, feed around your float, give it a twitch, feed again, reel in and repeat the process. It's really good when there's a lot of fish in your swim, and probably the most common way of doing it. To add to that, the busiest anglers are usually the ones that catch the most, and by that I mean the ones that cast the most, the ones that feed the most, usually catch the most. Another way to go about it would be to blast it in. And by this, I mean you're going to feed 3 or 4 pouches in a row, create loads of noise, loads of disturbance on the surface of the water, and try and cast your float right in the middle of those pellets. That works so well on hard days because the fish don't really want to be anywhere near the feeds, they don't really want to eat your hook bait, but you almost like shock them into taking it. Something that often fools big wary fish is to not feed at all. And you're not going to do this all day, you'll probably have a spell where you catch a few feeding, and then it goes a bit iffy, and it's a really good idea to just cast out, so your pellet's the only pellet in the swim. This can often, the noise, just your waggler hitting the water can often bring a few fish into your swim, and then your pellet's the only one to get eaten. On an average session, I'd probably implement all 3 of these methods at different times, so it's a really good idea to give them all a go at some point to keep fish coming all day. It is essential to keep a tight line between your rod tip and your float. When you get a bite, you want to be in direct contact with the fish, and the worst thing you can do is cast out, leave a bit of a bow in your line. By the time you've struck and tried to connect with the fish has already spat out your hook bait. So the best thing you can do is have a nice selection of wagglers on your side tray, probably 5 or 6 different kinds, ranging from some nice light foam ones to some bigger balsa ones. The balsa wagglers generally hold a bit better in the wind, so if you do get a slight bow in your line, you're still in quite good contact with your float. A lot of people just clip one float on and fish with it all day, but by being prepared to change with the weather conditions, you'll keep fish coming all day long. One of my biggest edges is carrying a couple of different types of hook bait. You can by all means just get an 8mm pellet out of the bag and fish exactly what you're feeding, but I like to fish a slightly lighter coloured pellet on the hook. I feel like the lighter coloured 8mm, they just sink a little bit slower probably because they've got a bit less oil in them. Another really good hook bait option is a red pellet. For some reason when you're fishing shallow, it might be the silhouette of the pellet, but red's a very good colour, so I just get a bit of the red Captivate dye, a little tub, just pour a little bit of the Captivate dye in, leave them to air out a little bit because you don't really want your pellets getting wet when you put them on the hook, and they're a really good option as well. A lot of people ask how deep you should fish a pellet waggler. Generally speaking, the minimum I'm probably going to fish is 2 foot deep, and the maximum around 4 foot deep. But it's important to understand that even if you're fishing 4 foot deep, you can still catch fish just inches under the surface. That's because essentially we're fishing on the drop. And on certain days when the fishing is a bit harder, it's really important to get that hook bait away from the float, so the separation between your float and your hook bait's around 4 foot, and they're not spooked by the splash of the waggler. This all ties in with the all-important casting regularity. The more you cast, the more chance your pellet's going to fall past fish, and the more fish you're going to catch. You might ask how you can get that separation between your float and your hook bait. And to me, it all comes from casting just that little bit harder than you probably need to. And just before the float gets to the destination where you want to get to, you sort of just feather it with the tip of your finger, slow it down, and you should get that separation between your float and your hook bait.